Good morning, Dr. Quahana. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so it's wonderful to have you. And for the listeners, would you just review a little bit of your background, your path to art consultancy for us?
Sure. My path to art consultancy started as an artist, formerly trained from 5 years old, beginning education in architecture, switching to business and art history, and master's in arts management, and a doctorate in theology to specialize in religious and traditional art history. And I became an art consultant after my corporate position ended, and I gave myself permission to start the business because I had the time, the resources, and the passion, and have been wanting to do it, forever. And so it was a wonderful opportunity to do something that I'm passionate about. And art consulting was a wonderful fit because it's connecting people with art in the most simplest way possible. And that's always been my goal.
Wonderful. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing. So, focusing in a little bit, I know you and I had a private conversation about it already, but for further clarity, could you describe a little bit your personal perspective on the differences and similarities between the terms art consultant and art advisor?
Sure. Well, I think one of them is focused on private, whereas the other was focused more on maybe public or corporate. And I don't like to separate them. I like to think of them as one. I like to think of myself as an advisor and a consultant. As a consultant, I advise, right? Whatever group that's going to be, it may be a public group, it may be a corporate group, or if it's a private individual with a large collection. And so for me, there is no difference. I think that they're interchangeable. And I'm sure there will be people who will disagree with me, but I like to think that advising and consulting are the same because you are really partnering with someone for a common goal. That's why I think they're the same, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. Thank you for diving in a little bit there. So, and I think that leads kind of nicely into the beginning of some of my questions for you today. And I think I want to start with some of them just regarding art collecting, art buying. So I know you had mentioned in our previous emails that you have a lot of information in terms of getting started on collecting, the health benefits and values of art collecting, and basic advice like that. So would you feel comfortable telling us a little bit more about some of that in an overview type of way?
Sure. Well, when it comes to collecting, I like to keep it simple. I tell people if you want to start collecting, start with what you love. There doesn't need to be a trend you need to follow, there doesn't need to be research. Just start with what you love. An easy way to do that is to go to a gallery. And if you see something you like, you can buy something. Or if you meet an artist, you can go to their website and possibly get a print if you don't want to spend a lot of money. So there are ways to start collecting in ways that are easy and simple. So that's what I tell people to do first off. And in terms of the benefits of art, viewing art, of course, what our mood is affected by what we see. And there are clinical studies that have been done that shows the connection between art and health. Most recently, there's a Dr. Mark Moss out of Colorado and a Dr. Ocean forgive me, I forget his last name, out of Canada,
Okay.
that have done specific neuroaesthetic studies on that very topic. Specifically with Dr. Moss, looking at healthcare professionals and how the burnout rate was increased during COVID and how introducing the arts into strategic programming helped to decrease that rate of burnout and retention while also increasing feelings of well-being, decreasing stress, things of that nature. And the same thing can be applied to the workplace. If your employees are looking at art that is boring, they're going to be bored. They're going to be distracted. I know that was my case when I was in corporate America. But if you have artwork that is aligned with the purpose of that business, it's going to increase their productivity. It's going to increase their well-being. And you would want that in an employee. That's just a broad brush of how the connection happens. But it's really a wonderful topic to explore. And it's a wonderful opportunity to promote artists and how it could benefit a company. So I love to educate my clients on that topic because it really helps them be more invested in what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. I know towards the end of 2024, and I was hesitant to bring it up because we've done so many businesses since then. I can't remember exactly the details myself, but I remember one of our headlines was a study that was done proving basically what you're saying, that there was a control group that looked at certain art prints, another group who looked at ones that were more vibrant or more densely packed with various objects. And there were different responses, often happier responses to the works that struck a balance, that had sort of emotional and figurative and abstract elements. And it was fascinating to me to hear about, I can't remember who it was in particular, but there was one artist whose works consistently brought out self-reported higher levels of happiness in the participants.
I want to know who that is.
I know. I'll go back through my notes later and I'll make sure to tell you.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing that I love to explore.
Yeah. So let me ask you, in your opinion, is there a difference between buying and collecting art in your own experience with clients? How might it show up if someone chooses to follow the trends, let's say, instead of thinking deeper and building more personalized or more applicable collection?
I think in general terms, when you buy something, in terms of art, you may be not thinking of the long term. You may be thinking, I'm going to toss this in 5 years. I may not want this, next year. You don't have a vested interest in it. I could be wrong, but that's what I generally think. Now, when I'm collecting, I am putting thought, research, and emotion into that purchase. And because I am building something that's a legacy, it's going to exist after I leave. And so for a company, when they're building a collection, this is something that could last through any iteration of leadership. It will remain. And so that's the difference for me between collecting and buying, is the emotional component and the vested interest in the object that you're purchasing.
All right. So if someone, let's say, is starting from a place of buying, if they think they only like it, but they want to learn how to love it, they want to learn how to collect, how do you recommend they cross that line? Is it through mostly reflection, thought?
I would say so, yes. I think if you're going to cross the line to collecting, I think it's going to start happening when you have multiple pieces, because you're going to realize I'm continuing to buy these pieces. So obviously it's something that's important to me. And it may not be something you do on purpose, but eventually you'll notice I have a collection. And at that point, you can decide, is this something that I want to invest in? Or is it something that I want to release to the wayside? But sometimes it happens organically and sometimes it happens on purpose. But you just realize, an example is whenever I went to visit a city, I would always bring my parents back a piece of artwork. And by the end of my education, they had all these pieces of art in their house. And so they were like, wow, I guess we're collectors now. All right.
Right.
even though we had no say in this whatsoever. Sure. But now my mother loves to buy pieces of art, and she doesn't buy anything that's expensive, but everything she purchases with her thought, her thoughts, her emotions are connected to it.
Yeah.
Most recently, she bought a piece that looked like the farm where she grew up, and it meant something very special to her. And so I like to think that I had a hand in her having this appreciation for art now.
Oh, I would say definitely. Yeah. That's great. Good for her. So shifting gears a little bit, but also sort of in a tangent from that anecdote, how art gets into places. Can you give us some anecdotes, some stories of your own of how you have received and handled commissions for public spaces?
I don't have personally public spaces, and getting pieces into public spaces is something that I don't have a hand in currently. It's an arena that I am looking to explore.
Gotcha.
And one of the ways I'm going to do that is because one of the clients that I serve is the government sector. That is a wonderful avenue that I'm using to have the opportunity to get work in the public sector, the public space.
Gotcha.
So I would love to, the people that serve our country, whether it's the government or the military, it is my passion, because I come from a military family, to see the works in these buildings that can be dark and gloomy sometimes, have work that is uplifting and encouraging to them for what they do. So that's a great question. And that is something that I hope to really tackle in the future, in addition to getting artwork in the community. And one of the ways I do that is supporting the local artists. Because if you're purchasing artwork from a local artist, from any artist, but if they're local and they have their pieces in buildings around the city, I believe you're in effect starting a conversation that has a possibility to unite and transform that community.
Yeah, absolutely. You're providing a level of visibility and sort of representation in that way that that if it doesn't start an overt conversation, it definitely does change the feel of things, change the vibes enough to become more supportive of local arts. I think that's very true. I had that experience out in Mesa. There was a lot of murals that were done on Main Street, for example, by local artists. And many of the local museums, for example, the Phoenix Art Museum, would intentionally include a lot of local artists into their group shows. And that being able to walk around an exhibition and see 4 or 5 names from the state of Arizona really made the work feel much more community based, no matter what the theme was, in a way that I appreciated.
I agree. There are always pockets of things like that that are happening. At least in my city, I'm in St. Louis, and so I love when I see that. And if I could be a part of that in any way, sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not, because I do volunteer quite a bit in different arts organizations. So sometimes I have a hand in that personally outside of my business. But it's something that I'm always committed to and that I applaud and champion.
Yeah. So let me maybe rephrase then. Some anecdotes regarding receiving and handling commissions for private spaces. Can you tell us about some common obstacles and common joys?
Sure. One of the obstacles that I often face is educating my clients on the fact that it is okay to spend money on art, right?
Yeah.
It is okay. It's okay to buy art. Obviously, you have me for a reason, right? They think it's frivolous, or, well, I'm going to say this. Sometimes there's a misconception that art is frivolous, or that it is elitist, or that it is expensive, or that it's not for everybody. And so sometimes with a client, corporate or otherwise, it is about making sure that they have that need, that desire, and the resources for the art. And some of that is convincing them that it's okay to buy art, because the bottom line is that art it appreciates in value. So it is an investment at the end of the day, even though we're not buying art to sell it. But at the end of the day, if you're building a collection legitimately, it is an investment. And if you have an investment, you tend to want to take care of that and you want to do it right. Is educating people on the fact that art is not frivolous, that it is in fact essential, that it is necessary, and that if it's missing, you know it, right?
Right.
So I would say that's probably one of the stumbling blocks. And also making sure that they reach out to me early enough where I can be involved in that budgetary process as early as possible. It's more difficult at least for me, it's more difficult for my company to come in if the process is halfway over. Because at that point, the resources have been allocated and they don't want to divert it to something else, especially if it's artwork, right?
Yeah.
And so getting me involved as early as possible is ideal, because it eliminates a lot of catching up that has to happen, if that makes sense.
Definitely does.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. But of course, to balance things out, let's talk about some common joys as well.
Oh, yes. My biggest joy is seeing the client's face when the art comes, right?
Yeah.
And seeing the artist's face when they release it to them. It's just such a joy. Most recently, we had a local artist. We commissioned a piece for her to do for my client. And when she brought it to the space, immediately the atmosphere shifted, because that one piece was exactly what was needed for that space. Immediately, my client, who had never used a consultant before, immediately he understood why he brought me in. He understood the necessity of having the artwork be in line with his space. And the joy on his face and the joy on the face of the artist was priceless. So that is something that I just love. That's my favorite joy. That's my favorite part. And I love to support artists. My favorite thing is supporting them, because I love that they're making money, that they're selling their work, that people are seeing their work on a large scale. That excites me, and I love that I can be a part of that.
Yeah, it's crucial how much the arts are part of the economy, and yet they're such an underrated, unknown sort of part. I think
Yes.
I think if more people understood, and I can't remember the figures off the top of my head for what percentage it is, but I think it's close to, last I looked, it's close to between 12 and 20% the arts makeup of public economies. And I feel like
Wow.
if that number were more known, we maybe wouldn't see some of the current things with the NEA and some of the current pushbacks against like the National
Mm-hmm.
Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities.
Yeah. I think when you get rid of things like that, you do a disservice to everybody because
Mhm.
you can't have one without the other. The arts for me are always parallel to everything else because I think it enhances everything else that we do, whether it's educationally, politically, socially. It's always going to be a part of our lives in a way that is a positive to me, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I was still listening, but I wanted to fact check myself there on that percentage. It is lower than I thought. It's 4.3% of GDP, but that's still 1.1 trillion US. So
Wow.
not an insignificant number.
Wow. Thank you for that number. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, love to hear it.
A
So
trillion? That's TR trillion. That's
yeah, TR
awesome.
trillion. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So hooray for all the benefits to the people who get to have their livelihoods through, the purchase of art and also the broader economic social benefits of that. It's a
Mhm.
wonderful thing, the arts.
Yes, yes, it is.
So, next question. Have you noticed that there are any particular organizations within your community or even
Mhm.
just like neighborhoods, demographics that show more appreciation for public art in your experience? And how does that actually show up, like funding via grants, commissions, etc.?
For sure. There are actually large corporations in my city that put quite a significant amount of money towards the arts. In fact, the biggest art fair that we have is the St. Louis Art Fair, and it is sponsored by Centene, which is a huge organization, and they have an extensive corporate collection. Not only is it on display in their building, but they are committed to making sure that the arts are shown here in St. Louis. And they're just one company. There are other organizations, like some nonprofit arts organizations, that have recently put installation pieces all around the city. And the city government is actually committing money towards that as well. I don't know the number, but I know that they are committed to not only maintaining the art that has been put up recently over the last few years, but making sure that more of it is seen in the community. So I love that the city government has an affinity for that.
That is great to hear. Yeah. Especially
Mhm.
because the one and only time I've been to St. Louis, it was when
Mhm.
I must have been 11. And I still remember one of the public sculpture gardens that I thought was just the coolest thing long
Yeah.
before I knew I was going to end up on this art history path. So
Hmm.
great to hear that there's still that emphasis on it in the community.
Yeah, that's a park actually. Larimar Sculpture Park is
Hmm.
is a public park and it has art installation throughout the entire park. It's huge. So you can go out there and you can see art. You can have a picnic in front of art. They have a fair every year as well. I used to volunteer for that all the time. So they have a fair, they have a gallery, but the art is on display in the park 24/7 because it is an art park.
Hmm.
And I don't know if I've been in any other city that has something like that, but I love the fact that it exists and that you can see art anytime that you want while the park is open, of course.
Right.
Yeah. But there's always art to see. There's a beautiful piece, well, actually my favorite piece in Chesterfield, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis,
Okay.
called The Awakening. It's only one of two of them in the world, and it's a beautiful piece if you want to look it up. It's
Yeah.
called The Awakening. It's
Yeah.
my favorite piece, and the city actually commissioned that piece. I think it was back in, I forget, 2009.
Oh,
I could be mistaken. It's beautiful.
it is.
Yeah,
It sort of makes me think that maybe have you ever seen The Eternals, the Marvel movie The Eternals?
I have not.
Okay, well, the big climax is
Uh-huh.
there's a like big alien that's coming out of the center of the earth, and he has
Uh-huh.
his head and arms raised in a very similar way.
Uh-huh.
That's fascinating. I wonder if Marvel modeled the Celestial after this.
Could be. I don't know. But yeah, there are only two castings of that. The other one is in DC. The artist is deceased, but they commissioned that piece. I forget the year, but
It,
I think it was $2 million that the city commissioned it.
it was created in 1980 and installed in 2009.
I was right. Okay, 2009. Okay,
Great
great.
job.
Yeah. The other one is in DC. I forget the artist's name. Sewell? No,
It,
is it Sewell?
J. Seward Johnson Jr.
J. Stewart Johnson. Okay, there we go. Yes. And I think PBS did a story on that piece. years ago when it was installed. So anyway, that's an example of public art. So there are lots of pockets of it around the city, which I love.
Great.
There could be more.
Sure.
but
There could
I
always be
love
more.
yeah, of course, but I love what I see. Yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say then when it comes to art in the workplace specifically, what do you find is the biggest holdup to finding the right fit for you sometimes, not necessarily on the client's end, but as the one looking through potential options?
Sometimes there may be too many options, right?
Sure.
It's hard to sometimes whittle down the artist to present to the client to kind of go through because there's so much fantastic art out there. So if there's ever such a thing as too much, like if you go shopping for shoes, there's so many shoes to choose from. And I believe that there's never too many shoes. But, but think of it like that. You have to figure out which shoes do I actually need, which ones actually fit my need at this moment. And then you start to edit out what you don't want or what is not right for that moment. And the way to get around that is that even if something doesn't work out for this moment, I will keep it in the back of my mind because it may work later on in a different place, in a different part of the building. It may not work for the lobby, but it may work for the conference room.
Okay.
It may work for the office of the president, but it may not work for the office of the secretary. So there are different, so if something doesn't work, I just put it on the back burner. But yeah, being able to edit out too many options is sometimes it's a good problem, but that's probably something that I kind of happen upon sometimes.
Okay, great. Well, not great, but I mean, thank you for sharing. So let me ask, we have reported in quite a few of our recent news stories on Christie's and some other major auction houses not necessarily performing as well as they'd hoped, especially in the second half of the year of 2024, and also on lots of censorship on publicly presented art that's been happening in the last especially year. So is it wise to invest in art right now? Is it wise to exhibit it, in your opinion?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
Yes and yes.
All right. So then with that sort of hopeful mentality, what are your general predictions for public arts projects and or the markets in 2025? Do you have any particular expectations?
I don't know if I have expectations or predictions. I will say that a lot of those projects are always going to be predicated upon the administration's desire to allocate those resources towards it. If they think it's necessary and essential, then they will put the money towards it. And if they don't, they won't. And so we have the opportunity as residents to voice our opinions that we think it's necessary and that we want to see those funds allocated towards that in ways that are reasonable for the city and for the residents. So I think it's always possible to do it in a way that is beneficial for everyone. And it's not something that you're throwing your money away on. It's not frivolous. It's something that's necessary because art in communities transforms, it heals, it unites, and it educates in ways that other things can't. And so I think once the administration knows that, they're more likely to allocate those resources towards art in the public and in the community.
Awesome. I agree. And I hope we do see that happen. So I think it could be interesting to discuss with you here a little bit. Are you familiar with Richard Serra's Federal Plaza piece and its removal in the 1980s?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought that could be an interesting sort of case study as a way to talk about perhaps failed commissions, like ways in which maybe somebody along the way, as you said, didn't realize it wasn't the right time or the right place for that artwork. What are your thoughts on that general situation?
My thinking is that when we commission something, we have to make sure that we really want it, that we really need it, because once you commission it, it is yours. You've in effect purchased it. Think about if you go to a car dealership and you specifically have a certain car commissioned with certain upgrades and features that have to be ordered 6 months in advance. There are cars that they built this car for you, right? So in effect, you've purchased that car. You put a down payment on it. You filled out the paperwork. You are in expectation of that car to come to you. So if that car comes to you and you don't like it or you don't want it or you feel like it's not needed any longer, it's still yours. And you have to use it for its intended purpose. And if you don't, then you need to find a way that is reasonable to have it be used for its intended purpose by someone else. If that's selling it, if that's loaning it out, whatever happens, it is yours at that point. So
Yeah.
I would always encourage people to, before you commission something, just make sure that you really want it and that it is really necessary. I love commissioned pieces, but the artist has put in a lot of work for that piece. It's just not fair to them to just yank the sheet from underneath them.
I agree.
It's very important to be mindful of people's time and their resources. And I know it's not an easy situation, especially when you're dealing with something that's in the public space, when you have so many hands in it.
Right.
But if you break it, you bought it, right?
Right. Yeah. We discussed the piece in a previous episode that had to do with essentially monuments in public space. And I felt like I landed in a very similar place in that it was wrong for that sculpture to be destroyed. I think you made a good point with having the responsibility to maintain it and perhaps use that opportunity to instead loan it out or place it somewhere else. I think that would have been a better option as well.
Yes, there are probably many cities around the country that would have loved to have that piece in their city.
Right.
And they may not have been able to afford it otherwise.
Right.
But if they could get it loaned to them or leased to them, that may be something that they could do logically and economically. It would enhance their city, their space. So there are ways to find a resolution that's best for everybody. And I always look for those resolutions.
Yeah. So being the resolution seeker and sort of at the heart of different relationships between art galleries, artists, and other businesses, organizations, corporations, how do you navigate some of the expectations on both sides in terms of the nitty-gritty, the costs, the timeline?
Very carefully. As I said, sometimes you have to be a therapist, but project management comes into play quite a bit. And thankfully, I have a background in that from my corporate experience. So managing timelines and deadlines and being mindful again of people's time and their resources. And so before I present anything, I need to know if the artist is taking commissions. If they're taking commissions, how far out it's going to be before we get it, how much the customer wants to spend. So knowing the budget ahead of time, knowing the timeline of when they want something installed, and then making sure that that aligns with the timeline that the artist has available, because we may have to do something different. Maybe we don't get something commissioned. Maybe we buy something that's already existing. That's a way to get around having to wait 3 months for a commission or something like that. Because if the artist is very popular, they may have a backlog of commissions and you may not get in for a long time. So just being mindful of everybody's time and their resources and knowing on the front end what you're working with is important. Money resources are always important to know and navigate in ways that are respectful of everyone's time.
Right. And I feel like that's a perfect lead into my next question. How does your personal experience as an artist inform how you interact as a consultant with the artists you work with?
I think it's wonderful because as an artist, I love to support other artists. And so being able to speak their language, but also being able to speak the language of the corporate clients as well, I think serves me very well because I've had such a well-rounded experience. It actually benefits me. And at the end of the day, not only do I want to serve my client in a way that's beneficial for them, but as I mentioned a moment ago, it excites me when I can get work for an artist. And I've never produced my art to sell it. So that piece, it's never been my intention to do that. So that piece is not something that I necessarily know about. I know about it, but I don't do it myself. But I understand that that is their livelihood. And so just as this is my livelihood, that is their livelihood. But being able to talk to an artist as an artist and get them work, to me, is exciting. And it makes it easy to talk to them. It makes it easy because I'm serving them just as I'm serving my client. And at the end of the day, those are the two stakeholders in this relationship that are most important.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then have you ever felt a particularly strong moment of maybe dissonance or guilt surrounding your interactions or a project? And could you tell us a bit about that?
I don't think so. I wouldn't say that I felt guilt around any project.
Okay.
No, I don't think
Just
so.
some negative emotion at large about, has there ever been any kind of incident that made you really question your position or your your relationship with a client?
I wouldn't say so. I would say the closest I could come to answering that question is saying that sometimes the budget is an issue with the client,
Okay.
meaning that they're not always clear on how much they want to allocate towards the art. They don't realize that they have to actually buy the art. Like, I am the consultant, but I don't buy the art. You buy the art. I'm just telling you what to buy. Just as if I was a stylist, they come into the salon, I'm going to pick out outfits for them, but they're going to buy the outfit.
Right.
So it's important. So sometimes clients may not know their budget, and it's very important that they do. So I would say that that probably is the only negative sometimes that I may face is them not knowing their budget and getting me in the process too late.
Gotcha.
So those things just don't. I think I mentioned this when we talked earlier, where that there were three things that are important for a client. They need to need the art, they need to desire the art, and they need to have the resources to buy the art.
Okay.
So those three things are good. And if they're not available, one of them, if they don't have all three of them, then it's not going to work.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot, make you feel as though you had to make any negative commentary about anybody specific. I just wanted to make sure we're having a well-rounded discussion.
Sure, for sure.
Do you ever find that your own personal preferences for specific art or themes or anything like that influence your consultation recommendations? And how do you manage that?
Sometimes I do, because, no matter what we do, our worldview is always going to color what we see. But at the end of the day, it's important for me to acquiesce to the needs of the client. Mm-hmm. So whatever I like, whether I like it or not, if the client doesn't like it, it's not going to work, right? So that's why I love to present many options to them, because as I present many options, we're going to come to a consensus on what they really, really want. And it may be different than what I want. And sometimes it may be the same thing. So while it may color what I think about or what I like, at the end of the day, it's not going to dictate what the client gets. Sure. Because their need is paramount in the day.
Right. Oh, here's one for you. How do you work towards accessibility within the largely economic-based context that you operate in?
Rephrase that for me.
So with art consultation involving a lot of facts and figures with timelines and budgets and whatnot, how do you work towards accessibility as well?
Accessibility for who?
I remember reading on your sort of resume profile that you sent over that you do prioritize accessibility as much as possible. Does that mean that you try to encourage your private business clients to have some level of public access to their collections, or what does that accessibility mean for you?
I would say that accessibility means that I love to give opportunities to those who may not necessarily get them otherwise. Okay. That's not to say that the client will buy their work, but accessibility for me means that getting people a seat at the table. So if there's a certain artist, for whatever reason, may not have the opportunity to get into a corporate collection, maybe with someone like me, they may have the opportunity to get on someone's radar. And so for me, that's wonderful for me. If I could get, a young woman or a young person of color, if I could get their work in front of a corporation and get them in their collection, that's huge for them, for the client. I think the client's going to benefit from that. And again, that's not to say that the client is going to buy that art. And it's not to say that that's the only art I'm going to give them. I'm going to give them art from the full spectrum, right? But I'm going to definitely make sure that everyone gets a seat at the table. That's important for me, just because I'm a Black woman. Mm-hmm. That's a fact.
Oh, sure, yes.
But they don't have to buy work from a Black woman. But if they want to, then I'm happy to make sure that they have that in front of them. They have it available to them.
Right. And that is very meaningful and significant. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for asking.
Of course. So what are some ways that you say you help your clients manage or maintain the artwork and the artist's legacies, respect for them over the long term?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you have a corporate art collection, you don't just buy these pieces and walk away. You manage that collection for the long term because you want it to be available for a long time, right? And so managing a collection may mean periodically visiting the space to make sure that the artwork is still safe. If it's in direct sunlight for too long, it may begin to fade. It may begin to deteriorate. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So you might need to rotate the pieces You may need to get the pieces cleaned. You may need to get the pieces reframed. So those are little things that keep visual interest in everyone that walks in the space, as well as making sure that the pieces are safe. Because if I am building a collection for a company, and this collection is a legacy that's going to be in this company for decades, it needs to be safe.
It needs to be around for decades. Yeah.
Yes. There are different things you can do to make sure that the pieces are safe. Again, sunlight, the framing that happens, those types of things are important. It's just little things like that to just make sure that it's safe. I would hate for a piece that I got commissioned for, a beautiful piece, to be damaged, because that would break my heart if the artist's piece is damaged because of something that could have been avoidable.
Right.
Yeah. So managing the collection to me means making sure that I am checking in on those pieces on a consistent basis. Now, if the client doesn't desire that, they have the right to not want me to manage the collection. But it is always my desire when I build it to manage it, because I want to make sure that it becomes like your baby in a way, because you want to make sure that it's safe and that it's growing up, right?
Yeah. Well, you did build it from scratch. So.
Yeah. And sometimes you may even edit a piece out, as you rotate pieces. Sometimes the client may buy more pieces than they need. And so maybe every 5 years, for visual interest, we may edit some things out and rotate some things around, because it gives it a different feel in the space. That's a fun thing to do. And it's an opportunity to see more artists, right?
Right.
Yeah. So managing is simply that. It's just looking in to make sure that everything is going well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So would you share with us some of the things that you've learned through your volunteer work versus your business? Like anything about events or other parts of working with arts-based nonprofits that you may not have learned as a consultant?
I love volunteering because it's an opportunity to not only build your skill set, but mature your skill set in ways that you probably wouldn't have if you were an employee or if you were just a member of the community. It gives me an opportunity to see behind the scenes. For example, I volunteer a lot with our local PBS affiliate. And so all of these wonderful children's shows that I grew up on, I get to find out their history. I get to be around the characters and participate in events at elementary schools where we bring these characters into these kids and we read to them, and we get to be a part of their education.
That's awesome.
So that for me, I couldn't have that experience if I didn't volunteer. So we have lots of events where the public comes. We have opportunities they have lots of outreach. And when I volunteer with different arts organizations, I have the opportunity to just be a fly on the wall while there is a show happening. I don't have to be a consultant. I don't have to be an artist. I can just enjoy myself. I can serve other people to help them enjoy that event even more. And everything that I do partners with what I already do, if that makes sense. It enhances it.
Yeah.
So being a volunteer, I think being a volunteer is just a wonderful way to serve people. Mm-hmm. And I enjoy doing that.
A new perspective on the whole thing.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Great. So I think that's all of my official listed questions. Is there anything at all that you wanted to dive into and have a sort of freeform discussion about?
I don't think so. I didn't think about anything ahead of time. Maybe I should have done that.
No, you're okay. I just wanted to make sure you had the opportunity to introduce anything you wanted to.
Yeah, I think we've kind of run the gamut on topics, but yeah, I don't think so. I think we've done a good job of speaking about a wide breadth of topics.
I agree. Okay, well then I will let you go, Quahana. Thank you so much for joining us. The listeners, thank you as well, Dr. Quahana. We appreciate you being here. And if there's anything else that you would like to share with us in the future, we'd love to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it, and I hope everyone had the opportunity to get to know me and were impacted in a good way by this interview.
Great. Thank you again. Have a great rest of your day, and you and I will talk soon.
Perfect. Awesome.
Bye.